Viktor Mihaly Orban will give Zelensky and the Ukrainians a knife in the back at the first opportunity. Viktor Mihaly Orban is like a hyena now, he can't wait for the Ukrainians to be completely destroyed. Viktor Mihaly Orban has not done anything to get Hungary out of Russia's energy independence. I know Poles well, I also speak Polish, and I believe that they will never want to occupy the territories that belong to Ukraine. But Ukrainians must not forget that Poland was a member of OTV, Warsaw Pact organization, and the remnants of this organization made it possible to take on young people with perspectives. Problems of corruption and espionage in favor of Russia exist even in the counterintelligence service of Poland ABW, Agent Bezpieczeństwa Wewnętrznego, if the ABW bitches will have some claims against me, all they have to do is sue me, because I can't wait for a prosecutor to start an investigation, because life imprisonment and espionage in favor of Russia are waiting for them. That's why they won't do any investigation, because they know that life imprisonment awaits them. Update March 29, 2022. After the Russians' negotiations with Ukraine, it seems that Plop Andrei, was right again. The Russians are partially withdrawing from the Kiev area, mobilizing and regrouping in areas where they are successful, especially in the southern part of Ukraine. Fighting in these parts of Ukraine will continue, and Ukrainians will have to go after the Russians in these areas or watch the Russians conquer these cities. The Russian strategy is very simple. They want to get the Ukrainian military out of isolated places, in the Kiev area where the losses are huge, and for the Ukrainians to be forced to go after the Russians. Stand still and see how the Russians conquer other cities will be unbearable for the Ukrainian army. The Russians will attack en masse in poorly protected cities and destroy any form of resistance. Ukrainian soldiers in the Kiev area will have to go to the aid of other Ukrainians near the Donbas, Kharkov, Mykolaiv, and later Odessa regions. I want to believe that the Ukrainians understood the Russian plan. But in such situations Ukrainians have almost no way to react. Either you watch the Russians conquer other cities or go to the aid of the other Ukrainian soldiers. I'd say that was checkmate, but there is no checkmate in checkers, in war. Update April 7, 2022. Better dead than to be communist. How much enthusiasm and confidence there was in April 7, 2009 among the population for the new Alliance for European Integration, but these individuals took the same methods as in Voronin's time. They stole $1 billion from the budget of the Republic of Moldova. They laundered over $23 billion through the banks of the Republic of Moldova, the money of the Russian mafia / FSB through the banks of the Republic of Moldova, and the destruction of any dream of EU and NATO integration. The theft of billions of dollars from the banking system will not be investigated by the current government, because Maya Sandu is involved in the robbery of the century in Moldova, and the mother of the justice minister's wife is also involved in stealing the $1 billion. Voronin, Dodon and the Grecianii, along with other communists and pimps like Plotnyuk, had to be in prison since 2009, but some of them are parliamentarians today. Why aren't Dodon, Voronin, and the Grecianii arrested now? Very simple. Because Maya Sandu also worked for the communist regime, and her bosses were even Igor Dodon and the Grecianii. I previously wrote in a post that, you can't make a communist to liberal. A slogan that we young people shouted against the communists at the April 7, 2009 protest was, better dead than to be communist. Unlike Maya Sandu or Stefan Gliger, look at Maya Sandu and Gliger's CV and you will be convinced, who served the communist regime. Some young people categorically refuse to serve the communists. The Germans through their organizations and foundations are the main financiers of the European communists from Moldova, and their main brain was Mark T. Kosiuk. They were trained until they began to think for themselves. Russians fund Dodon through offshore systems and German foundations through grants, and where there is agreement between Germans and Russians, always the result of these negotiations is a Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. This government/president has no chance of integrating us into the Euro-Atlantic structures. For the simple reason that some are incompetent, corrupt and communists in their minds. Maya Sandu, don't pretend to be anti-communist anymore because we know exactly who you are. Unlike the people in the Soviet Union who could not travel abroad, Maya Sandu could have done exactly what we young people did. To go abroad and not serve the communist regime, but she did not go abroad and decided to serve the Communist Party. She went abroad to study, being financed even by people who had connections with the Communist Party. Update/April 8, 2022 In Ukraine, all citizens between the ages of 18 and 65 are obliged to defend the country against the orcs. From February 24 until now, all Ukrainian citizens have been trained with military equipment, and if this conflict is going to last longer, Ukrainians will have a well-trained army that will count millions of professional soldiers. This war has shown the whole world that Ukrainians are the best soldiers on this earth. The events that took place in Bucha make the Ukrainian military even more motivated. If this conflict lasts longer and the Russians do not make a general mobilization, the Russians will never reach the Lvov. Thanks to the military capabilities/fighting spirit of the Ukrainians and Western military techniques will cause the Russians to suffer huge losses. They still have huge losses, but what follows will destroy the Russian army. Russians continue to receive money from the West because of the energy resources they export. Corruption, incompetence, stupid analysis of the state of the Ukrainian army was the main factor in the Russian military disaster in Ukraine. I wrote that the Russians can mobilize the Russian army up to 1 million soldiers, but they did not do that. With all the potential they have now, it is impossible to conquer all of Ukraine. The events in Mariupol have shown that you need to organize a Stalingrad to conquer the city. This was the main reason why the Russians left the Kiev region, and as I wrote earlier, for the Russians to regroup in eastern and southern Ukraine. Thanks to the military techniques they receive, the chances of the Ukrainians in the fight against the Russians are equal. The decisive battle will now take place in eastern Ukraine. If the Ukrainians win, the Russians will either have to mobilize or withdraw. If the Russians win this battle, they will have to attack massively, quickly, without giving the Ukrainians the opportunity to regroup and receive military equipment from the West. Mariupol is already lost. Ukrainians receive military equipment to fight the Russian fleet in the Black Sea. In an interview with journalist Doron Galban, Ion Sturza said that the pimp Vladimir Playotnyuk is his creation, and that he was taking his friends to pimp places even though he knew that the pimp provided them with women, whom he filmed with hidden cameras and all sorts of pornographic images to blackmail them later. Doron Galban did not ask Ion Sturza, if you knew that the pimp is doing porn with hidden cameras, then why were you taking your friends to his pimp's places? So that they too may be blackmailed by the pimp. Update/April 9, 2022 The Republic of Moldova is not in a position to show its muscles in front of the Russians. If you want to show your muscles, you have to do general mobilization, get financial and military help from the West. Try to get rid of the energy independence of the Russians and not pay the Russians to repair thermal power plants. When Ukrainians fight for the independence and integrity of the state, you arrest pro-Russians in Moldova for corruption, tax evasion, illicit enrichment, and not for wearing the orange-black lens. You destroy pro-Russian Moldovans who work directly with Russians and do not give them the opportunity for other Russians who are not involved in politics to unite with leaders whose expiration date has expired. You are constantly talking about corruption in Russia, what happened/is happening to the Navalny, how the Russians are arrested for protesting. What are the privileges of the Moldovan passport? Creating an external intelligence service. We are probably the only state that has a single intelligence service that has absolute power and deals with internal and external affairs. Popescu's resignation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and European integration and the adoption of the lustration law from the Soviet period and the Communist period from 2001 to 2009. without the possibility to hold public office and be denied the right to vote. 4. Pimping, blackmailing judges, prosecutors and police officers with compromising materials, compromised by intelligence services or mafia groups must be imprisoned for the rest of their lives, and to allow judges, prosecutors, police officers, for pimping, blackmailing judges, prosecutors and police officers with compromising materials, compromised by intelligence services or mafia groups must be imprisoned for the rest of their lives, and to allow judges, prosecutors, police officers, or other civil servants for a period of time up to 6 months to declare that they are blackmailed and to be amnestied. That after the period of 6 months, any crime that will be committed, the enforcement of the legislation in force. People who have suffered as a result of abuses committed by civil servants should be compensated. It should also be organized for an institution that protects the interests of business people. For any financial crime in the first stage there should be mediation between CNA/PCOX etc. and Moldovan business people with the possibility to pay only a fine. Public officials who commit financial crime or corruption should be the maximum punishment for them, seizure of the property they own. Increasing the salaries of judges, police, military, prosecutors. When you investigate corruption cases and have a miserable salary, the temptation to take a bribe is very high. But if you have a decent salary and you took a bribe, all their property should be confiscated. Update/April 10, 2022. The problem is that the Russians will not have a better plan to attack Moldova, and the actions to invade Moldova have already started. If the Russians make a new plan to attack Moldova, I will realize this plan and try to destroy any plan of attack. And in order not to destroy the plans of the Russians in the future, the Russians through the FSB branch in Moldova and Romania will try to lock me up in a prison, to kill me, to lock me up in a psychiatric hospital. Usually when their plan is destroyed, the Russian spies try to make fun of me, to declare that plans are my fantasies, or even to praise me, but at the first opportunity they will attack me again. This is how Russian spies work in Moldova and around the world. The Russians paid tens of millions of dollars to Moldovans, Romanians, Poles, Canadians, Americans, Germans to F#CK me because I am one of the best analysts on the ex-Soviet space in the world. I wrote about the fact that the Russians will take Crimea in February 2014. I ruined the Russians' plans to attack Moldova in January 2016, about the fact that DNR and LNR will gain independence and that they will attack Ukraine. I wrote in 2015. Update/April 17, 2022. For 11 years I left Moldova, and in all these years I met many people who had the citizenship of other states, and many times I met with the problem that people who declared themselves experts on the ex-Soviet space, at least they didn't know Russian. I often encountered the problem when I told people who called themselves experts that I also spoke Russian after telling them that I'm from Moldova. If the individual I am talking to does not realize that I speak Russian because Moldova was a member country of the Soviet Union, I immediately rank him as an idiot, because if you had been an expert on the ex-Soviet space you would have known that most states, except the Baltic, speak Russian. The fact that you speak Russian, you are already suspicious of Westerners, especially Canadians and Americans. From their point of view, I should watch the news on CNN or BBC for what is happening in Russia, and the logical question that arises, and they do not know how to answer Americans and Canadians when you ask them, where do CNN or BBC journalists get news from Russia? If you don't know the mentality and only know Russian, it is still a serious problem. Being an expert on the ex-Soviet space and watching Russian TV stations is a necessary thing, and people who say the opposite are idiots who should be sent for a walk even if they are American, Canadian or from another democratic country.